So now we see the unacceptable downside of auto emissions and living amidst cars that have emissions. These cars emit anhydrous nitrous and anhydrous sulfurous acid and carbon monoxide and other pollutants such as benzene and various hydrocarbon compounds, some of which we don't even know. The nitrous acid and the sulfurous acid gets oxidized in the presence of sunlight with ozone into nitric and sulfuric acid. The net effect is that the people that live in the proximity to this exhaust have permanent lung damage. And studies show that children raised in proximity to freeways have more permanent lung damage than those who live farther away. Moreover, people who live in apartment buildings and motels and hotels and parks and schools amidst cars which emit pollution, which they're used to, are inevitably going to be damaged by these emissions. So we know that this is an unacceptable risk. We know that it's a problem. We know that there's no urban design that's going to solve this problem. The only thing that's going to solve it is to have transportation that doesn't involve us living in the midst of cars that emit pollution that is going to sear our lungs. Now, it would be acceptable perhaps to accept this damage to children's lungs if there were no alternative. What would you give to not have your child or your friend's child or your grandchildren have permanently scarred lungs? What would it be worth to you? That's the question you have to ask. And it would be worth a lot. And if there were no alternative, we might say, well, we really have to run our society, and so we have to accept this downside risk and downside cost. But there is an alternative. Not just one, there are many alternatives. If we accept the fact of that we have to all drive cars, and cars are a wonderful thing, they give us freedom, there are other ways to drive cars. We have proven that there are plug-in oil-free cars that are possible. And we know that organizations such as the California Air Resources Board and the Air Quality Management District are ducking the fact that these cars work and are economical and are reasonable. The most these cars can cost, according to CARB's analysis back in 2000, was $30,000. And then you say, what would the alternative cost? What do they cost to have your children's and grandchildren's lungs scarred permanently with all of these pollutants? And what would it cost to buy fuel cell cars that run on hydrogen? We don't have hydrogen production facilities except in refineries. Refineries produce a lot of hydrogen. But if we use their hydrogen, it's not going to solve the problem. We're still going to have the refinery pollution. And the fuel cell cars don't exist. They cost about $1 million each, and the technology is unknown. And so CARB made this bad bargain of looking towards fuel cell cars, meaning they were just afraid back in 2003 to confront the oil and the auto industries. And, one assumes that money might have changed hands at those times too. Somebody on CARB may have taken some emoluments one way or the other. Maybe somebody moved on to fuel cells or some industry group who earned their stripes by killing the electric car. So if there is an alternative to all this gas burning and refinery pollution, and yet we are not taking that alternative, we are too weak as a people. It's too hard. It's too difficult. It's too much of a challenge to move to clean cars or to move to one of the other alternatives, electric trains, more bike paths, a better urban design so that we reduce the amount of people that have to move around. But the only way we're going to get rid of all of this emissions is if we get rid of emission cars that emit and the refineries that make the fuel and emit the smoke. Those refineries and those cars are based upon the old adage that the solution to pollution is dilution. When those refineries emit their smoke and their fumes and their noxious, toxic fumes, it goes up, but it comes down. And when it comes down into people's lungs, and it sticks in people's lungs, and what doesn't stick in their lungs and make them sick, give them asthma and other diseases, goes on the ground and becomes urban runoff and runs off into our streams and our rivers and our ocean, pollutes our entire world. So obviously when you emit these things into the air and claim that that's going to get rid of them, it's not going to get rid of them. They're still there and they're still causing damage. And the only way we're going to get rid of them is by confronting this problem of cars that emit, that we live amidst, and the refineries that are necessary to produce the fuel for those cars. Those two things must be confronted. Now, CARB itself only deals with mobile source, and AQMD only deals with stationary source. So they divide up the problems and they finger point one at the other. They need to start working at the entire problem. Because that's not the only problem with automobile emissions. We also have all of the upstream costs of getting the oil, exploring for the oil. One little known fact is that the largest user of electricity and natural gas in California is the oil extraction and refining industry. So while these refineries themselves emit pollution, the ancillary industries to make those refineries work, and the water that they require and the other resources they require and the pollution that they cause are also costs that we aren't even quantifying when we're talking about auto emissions and refinery emissions. And these things must be confronted. We must deal with these. And the cost, is in human lives. And the question is, what is the health of the next generation? What is the health and the lung capacity and the integrity, the physical integrity of our kids' worth? Why are we sacrificing those on the profits mills of these oil companies and of these politicians who take bribes?